There aren't many fights that guarantee more action than Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker, and these two lightweights will be going head to head at UFC 313. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down some fight clips from both these guys, see if it helps us work out which way this fight's going to go. I'm also going to end the video with a prediction. Both of these fighters do have similar tendencies that could lead to either one of them being KO'd, but there's one habit that I've identified from Justin Gaethje that I think could cost him in this fight. Yes guys, welcome back to Fight Energy. With UFC 313 just around the corner, I thought I'd start my coverage, start the breakdowns, because I feel as though the interviews are going to be coming thick and fast next week. So let's do some technical breakdown on this all-action-packed Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker. Before we get into the fight clips, I do want to take a look at the broader picture of this fight, and I don't think there's any argument that Dan Hooker is the informed fighter heading into this one. Fresh off that win against Mateusz Gamrot, a really impressive win where he was a massive underdog heading into it. He just showed that grit, determination. It was a really close fight, but he showed the will to win. And Justin Gaethje, he's coming off that loss at UFC 300 to Max Holloway. No one will ever forget that moment. And one point that I want to make on both these guys is that I can't believe that these two haven't fought yet. They're both part of those crop of lightweights. Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, even Conor McGregor, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, the guys who've been guaranteeing us all-action fights for so long. I think the point needs to be made that neither one of these fighters have that many fights left. They've both got so many miles on the clock, so let's enjoy them whilst they're here, and let's really, really enjoy this fight, because I think it's going to be an absolute barnstormer. I don't think it's a bad thing that both of these fighters have had some time off, especially Justin Gaethje after his fight with Max Holloway at UFC 300. Both of these guys have given us some amazing moments, whether they've won or lost. They've been in epic wars. You've got to think the Dustin Poirier fights against Justin Gaethje, both of them. Dustin Poirier against Dan Hooker, possibly, well, I think it is the greatest Apex fight of all time. You just listen to the shots in those fights. Unbelievable. But like I said, we're going to get into the breakdown clips. Just before I do, I'm going to ask that you subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. We do loads of breakdowns, whether it be interview breakdowns or technique breakdowns. I'm a huge UFC fan, so please do subscribe. Also, just a quick one for any of the viewers out there who do train. I have been getting a bit of cauliflower ear. I'm not sure how well that will show up in the camera, but if you've got any recommendation about wrestling ear guards, as you can imagine, the Reddit boards are full of trolls just providing like gimp mask equivalents and things like that. So if there's anything that you can actually suggest that would, you know, not look completely ridiculous but be very effective, just so that it doesn't get worse. I do quite a lot of media work, whether it's boxing or Muay Thai coverage, so I don't want the ears to get too bad. I don't mind them as they are right now, but if you can recommend anything, let me know. And with that being said, let's move on to the technique side of things, the fight clip breakdowns. And yes, I know what you might be thinking, this might not be the most technical breakdown. Both of these guys love a war, but let me assure you, there is method in the madness. Both of these guys do have very good skills, and the first thing that I want to look at is both of these guys' stances, the sort of pros and cons, and we're going to start with a clip looking at Justin Gaethje's stance. And this is one reason why I think that it could either be the making of him in this fight or could cost him the fight. Let's take a look. Okay, so the point that I want to make ahead of this clip is that Justin Gaethje, when he gets involved in these wild exchanges, he really does dip his head to the point where he's actually not really looking at the target a lot of the time. So let me just show you this exchange with Charles Oliveira from their fight. You can see, look how low, comparatively to Charles Oliveira's chin. Charles Oliveira's chin is fairly tucked, it's not that bad. Justin Gaethje's looking at the floor here. However, it does play a pretty vital role in protecting his chin. His head, you know, he's basically showing the top of his head to Charles Oliveira at this point, and he's able to use this to his advantage. Yes, it comes up for a very nice left hook there. He dips his head and brings it up, often going from right hook to left hook. And as you can see here, it kind of really does play into his hands here, because he's able to dip. Let's just go back a few frames. He's able to dip there. He sort of clubs Oliveira on the back of the head there. Let's keep it moving forward. He comes up, really nice left hook. But this left hook, which he does a lot of the time, you might just think it's flailing from Justin Gaethje, but a lot of the time he'll throw the left hook in order to land. Look at that shot. Look at the instant impact it has there on Charles Oliveira. He'll throw the left hook in order to set up that right hook. And especially you've got to think against a fighter like Dan Hooker, and we'll be getting into the breakdown of his stance a bit later on, someone who does hold their chin really high, who doesn't really move their head all that much. this could be a really, really effective combination. This strike, that right hook, the reaction was very delayed from Charles Oliveira. He throws a teep at the end and just falls to his back, as you can see there. So it was a really, really impactful shot. So that's the positive side of Justin Gaethje's stance. He dips his head really low, oftentimes not actually looking at the target, but when he's in the phone booth exchanging there, he knows where his opponent is. Even if he's just looking at their hips, at their feet, he's able to control, dip his levels, come back up top to release some nice left and right hooks. And this is something that we've seen throughout his career. Look, he's finished people with it before. He very nearly finished Charles Oliveira with it here. And I think it is something that we do have to look out for in this fight. However, like with all wild, exciting fighters, the very best of Justin Gaethje, the things that get him the best results, on the other hand, it's almost like a two-faced coin. The same thing can almost become his undoing. And we're going to see a reason why him dipping his head so low and not looking at the target can cost him. And I think it could well cost him in this fight. So this clip comes from the Max Holloway fight, that epic fight at UFC 300, which it did end up being a bit of a beatdown for Max Holloway. And of course ended with that epic moment, possibly the best finish in UFC history. But I'm just going to move this clip forward a few frames. And as you can see, Justin Gaethje, as we just saw in the previous clip, really dipped his level. You imagine he was thinking about coming up with a right hook, but Max Holloway times it perfectly there. Justin Gaethje's right hand is just covering it there, but you can see, and you saw afterwards, the impact that it had completely broke Justin Gaethje's nose. And that was a result of, just look at his stance there. I mean, this is low by anyone's standards. Yes, in boxing, you can expect to really dip low and roll. But in MMA and Muay Thai, where kicks are on and knees are on, this is just so risky. And Max Holloway, he landed this shot a couple of times in this fight. This was the most devastating impact it had there. Really short. He's able to get a turning side kick off super short there. But really, the main damage that it did was a result of Justin Gaethje's head being dipped so low. So I think the point that I'm trying to make there is that whilst, yes, a lot of Justin Gaethje's success comes from his dipping his head low, coming up with big hooks to either side, when he's not timing it correctly, or better still, if his opponent times him dipping his head, it can really lead to some bad outcomes. And that nose break at the end of the first round, who knows which way that fight was going to go if that nose break hadn't happened. But really, there's no denying it had a massive impact on the fight. And I've got some worse news for Justin Gaethje, because there is a shot that Dan Hooker loves to throw that we're going to take a look at now that I think could seriously be on in this fight. And I'm not going to do that typical YouTuber thing where I save the juiciness for the end of the video. There's juiciness throughout this video. And I said that there's a bad habit that could get Justin Gaethje unstuck, particularly in this fight. And I think it could be this dipping of the head. Take a look at this clip now from one of Dan Hooker's fights a few years ago, and you'll see what I mean. By the way, I do want to say brownie point for anyone who guessed that I was talking about Dan Hooker against Ross Pearson. You know, quite a few years ago, but the point still stands. Let's move it forward. So a looping left hand from Ross Pearson. Again, is this the kind of shot that we'd expect to see from Justin Gaethje? Yes, he does like a looping hook. And then Dan Hooker times it perfectly. Ross Pearson's dipping his level here. We don't know whether he was going for a clinch necessarily. We don't really get that far. Or a body shot, just some kind of level change. And Dan Hooker perfectly times that knee, that right knee. Let's just go back and see it again. So Ross Pearson lands the jab. Dan Hooker a huge knee up through the middle. Dan Hooker's really tall. He uses his tall stance to his benefit quite a lot of the time. Probably not nearly as much as he should do. He does get involved in some scraps back and forth. But you can see here his hips moving forward. His knee is literally connecting with the bottom of Ross Pearson's chin. The technique is perfect here. And the that's the gum shield, by the way. The gum shield goes flying. Now, this isn't the first time that Dan Hooker's used this technique effectively. I know that he did throw a knee on the finish towards Gilbert Burns. How mad to think that Gilbert Burns and Dan Hooker fought, and Dan Hooker actually beat him when Gilbert Burns is now at welterweight and Dan Hooker has fought at featherweight before. You forget about these fights sometimes. But yeah, Dan Hooker lands the knee here. And to be honest, Ross Pearson's head wasn't even that low. Nowhere near as low as Justin Gaethje's was. So if you think that Dan Hooker's able to land a knee like this from an opponent who isn't even dipping his head as much as Justin Gaethje, what kind of effect could a knee have from Dan Hooker on Justin Gaethje if he dips his head that low? I think it's something that Dan Hooker will definitely have taken a look at. I know in the Michael Chandler fight there was a lot of talk about Hooker's teep through the middle and his knee because he thought that Chandler might be wrestling, but either way, Chandler's a much shorter guy. So I definitely think they'll have been considering the knee here. And look, if this does happen, then you can come back to this video and thank me. But I do think that the stance of Justin Gaethje really dipping his head, if Dan Hooker's able to time it like he did against Ross Pearson, it could be the end of the show for Justin Gaethje. But anyway, this sounds like I'm just bashing on Justin Gaethje. We spoke briefly about Dan Hooker's stance, and he's very tall. Most of the time he's very tall. He doesn't really move his chin off the centre line. So I want to take a look at one clip from his fight against Jalen Turner, where I think that his stance, his tallness, his not really moving his head, where it could get him caught again by Justin Gaethje, because this shot selection from Jalen Turner is something very similar to what we see Justin Gaethje doing. Okay, so this is another fight where Dan Hooker was a massive underdog heading in against Jalen Turner. Jalen Turner, who many have accused of being a weight bully, is a huge lightweight. So I think in terms of their statures, you can't really compare Jalen Turner as an opponent to Justin Gaethje. However, we're just going to take a look at this clip because remember, the focus is about Dan Hooker's stance, how tall he stands, how he doesn't really move his head off the centre line. And also, because it's very relevant here, remember there was accusations about him being weak to the body. Edson Barboza was able to stop him with body shots. Now, Edson Barboza has possibly one of the hardest switch kicks in recent UFC history at least. And the accumulative damage he was able to do to Dan Hooker in that fight was just insane. So I'm not surprised. I think Edson Barboza would have stopped anyone with body shots that night. He was just in that flow, so dangerous. But it could be something that Justin Gaethje is targeting. So let's take a look. We're just going to play this forward. And Dan Hooker, he throws a head kick here. Now, Dan Hooker threw quite a few head kicks in this one. Very impressive that he's able to kick the head of a taller man in Jalen Turner. But as you can see, Turner blocks it and fires a really nice shot straight to the body. That really, really dug in. So if Justin Gaethje is looking for either left hand or right hand to the body, just know that it could be countered off a kick off Dan Hooker. We're going to keep it playing forward. And now you can see Dan Hooker felt that body shot. His hands went so low. And his chin, it's not as if he tries to drop a shoulder, create an angle and move away from it. He gets caught clean on the chin with the right hand. Now, Jalen Turner is a power punch as well. He's knocked down Renato Moicano, a lot of fighters with his strikes. So that won't have been a light strike. Justin Gaethje is a power puncher as well. If he's able to land a nice body shot, get Dan Hooker backing up in a straight line like he is here. Bear in mind that kick started at the centre of the octagon. And he's just backed Dan Hooker up into a straight line with a really powerful right hand. I mean, one of the huge advantages of Dan Hooker's game is that he's able to rely on his chin. Other than the Michael Chandler knockout, which we will be coming to soon, I just think he's always had such a great chin. Yes, you're going to give me examples where he has been stopped before, but just think about the miles on the guy's clock. That fight against Jalen Turner here, he was able to rely on his chin so much. All of the wars in which he gets himself in, he's just prepared to out-tough his opponent. I'm not sure you can say the same for Justin Gaethje. I know that Charles Oliveira, a lot of people say that he's the hardest hitting lightweight of recent memory as well. Even though he's got that tall stature, Justin Gaethje said that when he got punched by Oliveira, it was like an electric shock just went down his body. But Justin Gaethje, he does get dropped a lot. Tony Ferguson was able to drop him. I don't think he's chinny by any stretch. Max Holloway, that was more of an accumulation. But I do think Justin Gaethje's chin is weaker than Dan Hooker's. So if they were to get into some kind of wild exchange, you might think that Justin Gaethje would come off worse. That being said, in a fight where there are so many variables, we're expecting so much chaos in this fight. All it will take is one punch on the button when the opponent doesn't see it coming for them to get knocked out. Now, because we just spoke about Dan Hooker potentially being very hittable because he backs up in a straight line, there's also a bit of cause for concern with his lateral movement. I'm not saying that Dan Hooker is a bad mover, he's got bad footwork, but I think he's very good moving forward, but when he's on the back foot, he leaves himself very vulnerable. So we're going to take a look at his lateral movement, and it is the fight that I just mentioned before. It's his fight against Michael Chandler, and how his lateral movement really left him exposed. I also want you to make a mental note of the setup to this finish, because it was very similar to that shot that Jalen Turner just landed on Dan Hooker. So Michael Chandler lands a body shot on Dan Hooker here. And in a very similar vein to what happened with Jalen Turner, I did research these videos, but certain similarities when you're just going through them in order like this do pop out to you more. We just saw Jalen Turner land a body shot on Dan Hooker. Both his arms came down. The same thing's just happened now with Michael Chandler. And Dan Hooker's, he's almost doing the right thing here, sidestepping, moving laterally away from Michael Chandler. But Chandler has the wherewithal to send this left hook. He doesn't send a short left hook here where he'd miss the target because Dan Hooker's stepping sideways. Dan Hooker's moving this way along the octagon. So if Chandler was just to throw a hook here, he'd be missing the target. But he aims it where he thinks Dan Hooker's chin is going to be. And as you can see here, it's a really long, outstretched left hook. And he hits the target perfectly. So that's set up. Chandler forces Hooker back with the body shot. Hooker tries some lateral movement, but Chandler just lands that perfectly and drops Dan Hooker. Now, this again, it might seem as though it's going against what I said about Dan Hooker's chin, but we all know that Michael Chandler hits like a train, and that left hook, that debut from Michael Chandler was just unbelievable. But the point I want to make is, we've just seen in 2 clips there, Hooker get hurt to the body, or at least take a shot to the body, and then his instant reaction is to bring both his hands down. He doesn't have the best poker face when it comes to taking a body shot, and both of those body shots led his opponents able to land clean shots upstairs with his guard nowhere to be seen. Now, the reason why I picked out that clip with Michael Chandler is because of Justin Gaethje's finish of Edson Barboza. Now, there are certain similarities we're going to take a look at here, but if Dan Hooker is going to be moving laterally along the fence with his hands down, he can expect to be caught from some big shots from Justin Gaethje. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, so we are really getting through these clips today. Let me know if you're any closer at this point to making your prediction. Like I said, at the end of this video, we've got a few more clips to go. I will be giving my final prediction based on what we've seen. But because we've seen a lot of positive things from both guys and potentially negative. So yeah, let's just see about that. Right, so I'll move this forward a few frames. Edson Barboza is backed up against the fence. Justin Gaethje's marching forward. And here, rather than a body shot like Michael Chandler threw, Justin Gaethje threw a right hand that just sort of comes down on the top of Edson Barboza's forearm/elbow. And Edson Barboza, similarly to Dan Hooker after taking that body shot, moves laterally along the fence. Let's keep it playing. Yeah, he's moving laterally down the fence. His hands come down. His hands are nowhere near his chin at this point. And again, look where Justin Gaethje's arm is here. His arm and the direction of that hook is where Edson Barboza is going to be, not where he is. This is drilled a lot in MMA techniques. You often see kicks being thrown. When someone's moving laterally, someone will throw a kick into the place where that fighter is heading. And Justin Gaethje is doing a similar thing here with this hook. And as you can see here, it clips Edson Barboza. Really, really good shot here on the button and drops him. And look, in these fight breakdowns, one of the things that I do is look for patterns. And this is something that I have seen Dan Hooker do a few times. Lateral movement with his hands down. Justin Gaethje, he knows where to throw these punches. That finish against Edson Barboza, we've seen him really back up fighters along the fence and cause damage when they're moving sideways. So this is something that you could expect to see in this fight. So if you see Dan Hooker hurt to the body at any point and moving sideways, expect to see a shot like this. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Justin Gaethje, he drills this kind of thing. Dan Hooker, is he vulnerable to the body? Who knows? After reviewing those 2 clips, it's making me think that he doesn't like being hit to the body, so maybe that's somewhere that Gaethje will target. But I think before we get to the last clips, which is talking about areas in which both fighters are vulnerable to KOs, I do want to talk about the positives of both these guys. Like I said, these two are absolute warriors, lightweight veterans who've given us so many shows. They're both so dangerous. I think that's obviously the reason why this is a bit of a people's main event, isn't it, at UFC 313. Of course, you've got Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev. I'll be doing a lot of coverage of those guys in the build-up to that fight as well. But I think this fight, just because both guys are so dangerous, they're so reckless at times, of course you're going to want your favourite fighters to be defensively responsible. But if you're a neutral looking at this one, both of these guys have vulnerabilities defensively, purely because they are always hunting the finish. They're always looking for either that knockout or to swarm their opponent if they think they've got them hurt. But naturally, this does leave openings, and we're about to see the opportunities that both of these fighters leave for their opponents when exiting the clinch. Because I think this is going to be a really, really important area for both of these guys in this fight. Let's take a look. By the way, guys, please do rewatch this fight. After watching this video, of course, rewatch this fight. It was absolutely insane for as long as it went on. It was a first round finish, but yeah, it was insane. So let's start. We've just started from a sort of clinch position. Charles Oliveira goes for a big hook. Both of them get a bit tangled up here. That Muay Thai grip that Charles Oliveira loves to get on the back of the neck. Let's have a look here. But Gaethje lands a nice right hook there. I don't actually remember that shot. Gaethje lands a nice short right hook, which opens everything up, right? So Oliveira was happy in that clinch, but whoa, he just took that right hand, so he allows it to go down. However, we just saw it from Dan Hooker. We just saw it now from Justin Gaethje. His left hand is down there. His right hand is there. Nothing protecting his chin. And Charles Oliveira lands a huge right hand, which drops Gaethje and ends up in the finish. But if we just go back, the fact that he was able to land this right hand cleanly, straight off the clinch, does tell me that Gaethje gets a little bit irresponsible at times. This goes from a Muay Thai grip, a separation. Now, ideally, if you're a Gaethje fan, you want to see him releasing that hand, getting his hands up straight away. Either that or a bit of lateral movement, dipping his head off to the side. However, he just backs up, again like Dan Hooker at the start, in a straight line, and pays the ultimate price. So obviously I don't know what Justin Gaethje has been working on really in this camp, but I think in a fight where both fighters are going to be moving forward, swarming each other, there probably will be quite a lot of clinching up close when they're not just going for each other, trying to take each other's head off. I think both guys need to be really careful. Let's take a look at this last clip, and it's one from Dan Hooker against Dustin Poirier. I was looking for ways in which I could fit more highlights of that fight into this video, but really it was a bit even too chaotic for me. So I've just got this clip from Dustin Poirier's victory over Dan Hooker. And it does show another vulnerability of Dan Hooker from the clinch. So you have to think for both of these guys heading into this fight, if they do clinch up, if they do get tangled, on the break, there could be big opportunities for both of them. And by the way, just looking at these clips is getting me so excited for this fight. I know you never want to jinx it, and I probably shouldn't say this, but there's no way, absolutely no way this is a boring fight. And it's 5 rounds as well, which I just think is insane. However, this fight did go the 5 rounds, although the damage... Who knows the damage that it did to both of these guys. I know people said that Dan Hooker wasn't the same fighter afterwards. That being said, he's just put together a nice 3-fight win streak. So here you can see a clinch. I just moved it forward as both guys are in a clinch here against the fence. They were both exhausted at the end of round 2, which for the pace, you can't blame them. But here, Poirier's able to land a short elbow here. Really nice shot. And then... it's a bit pixelated here, but I'm sure you can see. Then a sort of shovel, uppercut / hook. Really short again. And then a cracking right hand on top of that. And look, these punches, when you break it down so slow, yes, you can see some good detail, but you can't see the pace of it. They were really short, quick shots that Poirier was able to land. But again, it just came from Hooker having one hand on Poirier's neck, engaging a clinch, letting go, and then just not putting his hands back up. Again, I make this sound so simple. It's definitely not when you're tied at the end of just 2 rounds that have been an absolute war. But again, I'm just looking for opportunities here, which one of these fighters or the other one can capitalise on. And with that being said, I'm definitely expecting some opportunities from the clinch. I expect this fight to be fought at a really high pace. So similar to the Dustin Poirier-Dan Hooker fight, by the end of the second round, both of these guys should be gassed. That will leave more openings, more opportunities. They'll want to clinch and wrestle just to get their breath back at certain points. So from that point, I expect some opportunities to open up from the clinch. So we've just done a lot of clips there. I'm just sort of getting my thoughts together, getting my breath back. But how do I think this fight's going to go? Let's have an overall recap and a prediction for this fight. Justin Gaethje's biggest weakness is also his biggest strength. The fact that he does throw absolute bombs, whether it be his low kicks or his hooks, with his head down with his chin tucked, which most of the time does protect him. but I think against Dan Hooker, where the knees and the front kicks through the middle and he has that natural height, could really end up in a big shot being landed on Justin Gaethje. However, I don't have all that much confidence in Dan Hooker's ability to move his head off the centre line. He stands really tall and the target there of his head is there to be hit. If Justin Gaethje is able to set up something with a nice body shot, then going to the head, it could be curtains for Dan Hooker. There's loads of ways in which this fight could end, but they're just a couple that I picked out there. We also spoke about Dan Hooker's movement on the back foot. He can really leave his hands down, and how from the clinch both guys will have a lot of opportunities. Okay, so I think I'm ready to give my final prediction, and I am leaning towards a Dan Hooker decision. I think this is going to be an absolute war. I can see Justin Gaethje being dropped a couple of times. Ultimately, I think it just comes down to the fact that at this stages of their career, I trust Dan Hooker's chin more than Justin Gaethje's. Like I said, I don't think Gaethje's chinny, but I think he can get hurt more often than Dan Hooker. And the wave that Dan Hooker's riding at the moment, that momentum, I think these things do play a part. I think he's very confident. We've not seen Gaethje since the Max Holloway fight. Look, I wouldn't be surprised if Justin Gaethje does win, but I think on balance, I am just heading towards Dan Hooker. If Justin Gaethje does dip his head and eat a big knee, then I'm expecting a lot of plaudits. I know that Justin Gaethje's got a massive fan base, so they might not like that prediction. But look, I'm just being completely open and honest what I think is the most likely outcome for this fight. Let me know what you guys think. If you think I'm way off, or if you just think I've got some of the technical analysis wrong, I do really appreciate any of the comments. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys later.